Hi everybody. This is a brief tutorial walking through the updates in my VAMP plugin. If you don't know what VAMP is or don't have a copy of it yet, I'll put a link in the description. VAMP is an add-in that works in Blender that removes invisible and hidden backlines to simplify meshes, just like this image here. Instead of the sort of see-through wireframe, you get just the front edges and the silhouette. So let me walk through quickly the function and cover some of the new features. First, we have a very simple Blender scene. The only thing in the scene right now is the default cube. VAMP requires at least one object and at least one camera. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a camera. And I'm going to put the camera kind of facing the object. So in order to turn VAMP on, you need to have installed it. And then in the add-ons menu, you need to enable it. As soon as you enable it, in the render window here, the render tab, there'll be a new tab called VAMP Settings. To make VAMP work, you need to tell VAMP what it wants to act on, what target. The way you do that is to create a collection and include all of the objects you want included in VAMP in that collection. I'm going to click this, add it to a new collection. We're going to call it VAMP Input. Okay, now you can see that it's there in the outliner. Down here in the VAMP target field, VAMP Input, the same information. And the camera is pointing at that object. You say VAMP once. Now you can see VAMP worked. It spat out a bunch of new information here. Let me hide the original cube. I'm going to hide some of the rest of these as well. And let's look at these two objects. This object is the silhouette, the outline from the camera's perspective. And this object is all of the visible edges, including the outline. This particular cube, the silhouette is included as part of the outline. And something to note, I'll go back out of the camera screen, excuse me, the camera view, is that it's only showing those edges which are visible from the camera's perspective. It doesn't show anything that's hidden. And this is the whole point of VAMP. For a simple object like this cube, you could easily just remove those backlines manually, but for an animated scene or a scene with multiple objects, that becomes a lot more complex. And VAMP is designed to do that. So VAMP has some built-in capabilities to remove hidden lines, but it also can now take advantage of the Blender grease pencil line art feature, and I'll show you how to integrate that with your use of VAMP in a few minutes. So this is a pretty simple example. We'll get a more complex example so we can walk through all of VAMP's capabilities. Okay, here's a simple demo scene, and this scene is animated as I run the animation. And the actual camera itself is also animated. See, it orbits around the scene. So if you're in the camera view, this is the perspective from the camera. Several objects, you've got a gap through one of this middle square. It's small and large objects. This is a good example of how to use VAMP. So again, in order to use VAMP, you need a camera. I have it yoked to this empty so that it can spin around the scene. And then you have to have at least one collection containing objects that you want VAMP to act on. And that's what this VAMP input is again. So we'll go VAMP Settings, VAMP Input, that is already set up ahead of time. And click VAMP once. Okay, it took a little longer, and that's because there's a lot more going on. And let's kind of look at the output. Sliced final. This is the VAMP version of all of the edges it can see from its perspective. And again, recall that it's only keeping track of those that it can see. Anything that's not visible gets hidden. So as you kind of rotate around, you can see what it's chopping out. Or this, these sort of occluded lines back here, and then a big part of the front face of this sphere, and the entire back of these objects has also been removed, again, just for simplicity. Something to note, and I'll point this out because I'll contrast it later. This is slightly imperfect. This line It doesn't go all the way to where it would cross. And the same thing with this line. Thing with these guys over here, you can see that they don't quite reach. VAMP has a setting called cuts per edge. And if you set this to a low number, basically what you're telling VAMP is, I'm going to subdivide the existing object edges this many times. So in this case, it's only going to divide it into 2. The example we ran was with 5, but let me rerun this and you'll see what happens. So when I do 2, there's a number of lines that just drop out completely. And that's because if you split the line in half, the half of the line that's might be showing is part of it is obscured, so it's removed. If you increase this back to, say, 6, and VAMP again, now you can see it does a better job filling in those small gaps. And this is just for lines that are partially occluded. But this is one of the performance settings. In VAMP, you can get better outcomes if you increase it. Now, for a very complex scene, be aware that this increases the computation time significantly as well. So this is a simple scene. We'll go ahead and VAMP again from this new perspective. You see as the camera is rotating around this scene, again, we're seeing this through the camera's view. The objects themselves are holding their location. VAMP once. And it's resetting the perspective from the view of the camera. Move the camera, rotates over to here. Again, you see it's like it's casting a light, sort of the view. So let me walk through the VAMP settings because this kind of bears on how you might use it. Original objects, recall, there's 3 separate objects. There's this thing we're calling big cube. There's little cubes, which is several smaller cubes, and then there's a sphere. The sphere is interesting. Go into the edit mode. In addition to this sort of inset, it's also got several lines that are marked. These are freestyle marked edges. So you go to edge mode and you select it, go to edge menu, you can mark freestyle edge. You can also clear it. Just cleared that one. That. If you mark those freestyle edges in certain modes in VAMP, it can read those as edges you want to see, even if perhaps you wouldn't normally see it because it's on a face that would be obscured. So the standard VAMP mode, we saw the outcome here, is at the original objects again. Again, it's all from this particular mode is from the point of view of the camera. Let's kind of walk through what this did. So sliced. This is, after it subdivides, does its calculations, these are the edges that VAMP considers to be visible and therefore are included. Silhouette final here. This is just the outer silhouette of all the objects that are included in the scene. And again, from the perspective of the camera. One thing to note about the silhouette mode, and I'll just kind of show you now. Right now, this is the silhouette of all the objects combined. So for instance, there's a small cube that's partially obscured. So you can see this cube, the large and the small cube silhouettes have been combined here. If you switch to individual silhouette mode in this menu on the right, we'll do it again. Now you can see that the individual item objects are each getting their own silhouette calculation. This one gets cut off because of the lengths. It's a little better. It's down just for convenience. So again, that's what individual silhouette mode is about. Flat silhouette and flat sliced. These are the exact same data, but it's been remapped to a top-down view. Hide silhouettes. Camera now as well. And the reason for this is OsciStudio has a top-down view by default. So you can take a very complex scene, you can have a lot of camera movement, basically can remap it to this top-down flat view. And that makes it easy to have that information get into OsciStudio without trouble. And these two, flat silhouette, flat slice, these are exact same views, but from the top down. Okay. These two other objects, trace and trace final mesh, set that one aside for now. Go back to that. Get into the camera view. So one thing to note about the standard mode of VAMP is that all of the edges are visible. So all of these edges, the entire complexity of this globe is on display. All these subdivided edges on this cube are on display. That may not be what you want. So there's a couple of the modes that allow you to simplify what is being shown. One is called freestyle. Recall that we had the marked edges on the sphere. Vamp that again. This mode, the silhouette, this mode only shows you edges that have been marked with that freestyle mark. So as you go around, only going to see those edges. Now this mode works great when you combine it with the silhouette. You can see the lines on the object as well as the outline of the object. And this allows for kind of a simplified version, but you can decide if you want to leave a few lines in there, a few feature lines, you can see what's going on. Another mode is called creases, and that's for use with freestyle. If you select freestyle and then you select creases, typically it's set around 160. Set it there. Okay. What VAMP will do is it will find sharp edges and it will leave those in. See, these inner edges on this cube are still visible, but the sort of flatter edges it removes. So that's what's going on here. And you can adjust that by this crease angle. If you set it to a very high number, basically 180 says, show me all of the edges, including those that are on flat surfaces. But if you dial it down to say 170, you can start to remove some of those the visible edges, and we'll go back to 160, which was my example. And now you can see it's showing just the freestyle lines and the creases. Now, if you don't want these lines, obviously you can just remove them from the object, the original object itself in edit mode. You see where those green lines are. Okay. The next mode is, let's go through some of the other options here. This one in particular, crop. Currently the crop mode is set to none, but there's two other crop modes. One that's important to note is frame. And recall that we're looking at the scene through a camera. There's some parts of the objects that are out of frame though, over here and over here. And in fact, from the sort of top-down view as well, the camera view is really kind of here, but then there's these objects that go out of frame. You may want the entire scene to be visible. Everything from the angle of the camera, regardless of how wide the camera's view really is. But you may prefer to crop the scene to exactly what the camera's seeing. In particular, this is if you have a very complex scene, you're flying a camera through it, you really only want to see what the camera sees. It simplifies the calculation. It definitely simplifies the output mesh that you're going to use elsewhere. You can switch this to a frame mode, and I'll revamp it. And now, after pushing vamp in frame mode, it crops off the scene right at the edges where the camera sees. It doesn't include anything that's outside of that camera view. Now, if we go back to the top-down view, you can see that this one also was cropped off at the edge of where the camera could see. And that's a pretty useful one, again, for complicated scenes. Some other settings, there's one other here, which is front, which that one crops everything that is in front of the camera, the plane of the camera, crops everything behind the camera and includes everything in front. In this particular scene, camera is always sort of facing all of these objects, so they would all be in scene. But imagine you had a scene where you're flying through a forest and you wanted to only see the trees that are in front of the camera, and as soon as something goes behind the camera, you want it to fall off. Well, you can achieve that using that front. Some other settings here: output scale. This just scales the flat silhouette and flat sliced. You can scale it. It's normally set to 1 unit, but you can go above or below. Edge limit. This is the active limit for VAMP within this system. So, for instance, if you ask VAMP to calculate a very complex scene, it would first, before it did anything, it would count up the number of edges in the scene and decide that above my edge limit. Really, this is just a speed limit, so you don't accidentally run VAMP on a complex scene and crash Blender. You can set this as large as you like. 100,000 is already a big number. Usually 10 to 20,000 is sufficient. At some point, even if VAMP can do the work, the output is going to be so complex that you won't be able to use it. So just keep that in mind. Cuts per edge, we mentioned that before. It's really the accuracy of these lines creeping up to where they're occluded by the other edges. Minimum length is, you can tell VAMP what is the shortest line that it should care about, and it shouldn't subdivide very short lines. So I just set that a bit higher. You can see when I do that, it removes some of the very small lines. It doesn't subdivide them because it's not worth the trouble. Cull is interesting. Cull is if you have a super complex scene and you really only want things that are local to the camera, you can turn on Cull, and what it will do is remove any objects that are in the scene that are outside of the radius that you set. In this case, it's 10 units. I think those are meters by default. This particular scene is not that large, but let me try short cull distance. Still. Yeah, sorry, this is a bad example for that. If the camera was further away, it would remove some of these objects. Unfortunately, most of my objects are centered at the origin, so I've removed them all at once. But know that cull is there for purposes of simplifying a very complex scene. If you build a big environment, you don't want to recalculate that whole thing every time. You really want to focus on what's in view and what's nearby. Raycast distance, this has some of the same impact. I would leave it at the setting. You can play with it. It speeds it up slightly if you pull the distance in, but do know that what this is doing is testing whether something is obscured. So if you make it shorter, it will include things that are further away, and that's not really what you like. So again, 50 units is typically plenty. If you find that there are things far away that are being included in your scene, you don't know why, try upping the raycast distance. Hit test offset. This is, recall when we first started, there were these it's misbehaving. Okay. There were these little sort of edges on here. This is sort of the tolerance of the system to include or exclude edges like that. Play with this if you're having issues of things being hidden that shouldn't be or included that shouldn't be, and you may find you get better results there. Denoise has an interesting application. If you have a project that has a very complex scene and is throwing out lots of extraneous lines, you can use Denoise to sort of mop up the small ones. And what this does is it only applies to the scene. The denoise only applies to the flat versions of the final results. So this particular version, not the version that you would see through the camera. What Denoise does is it finds edges that are below a threshold length, and this is the length you're setting here, and it removes those that are below that length. The top-down view and see if we can see this in effect. Go ahead and turn it on for now. Things I've removed a bit. Let's go ahead and increase this threshold. You can see it's dropping out some of these lines that are real fine details. One challenge with Denoise is that it sometimes distorts your results. You can see it's starting to distort the end, so use this sparingly. You've got lots of little sort of flecks and you want to remove them. That's what this is good for. Okay, I think that's enough for this first set. I want to pick this up in another session to talk about the grease pencil line art feature that just rolled out of Blender and how that links up with VAMP. Hey, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.